Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. And before we jump into today's conversation, which is going to be a wonderful interview between Jen and Olina Banerji. I can't wait for people to hear that conversation, Jen. Here's the question that's actually a continuation of the one we did last week. How do leaders know when to protect their staff or like buffer their staff from initiatives, or when to connect them or leverage these initiatives that are being handed down to them? So we were talking about that last week in reference to navigating bureaucracy, but I felt like you felt like we needed to unpack that a little bit more. Let's go there.
Right. Yeah, listeners, we stopped talking about it and we said, no, we're not done. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. And I hear a lot of principals ask me, I want to sometimes just protect my staff from the bureaucracy, from initiatives that maybe seem like a flash in the pan or seem to not make sense. When do I know to do that versus when I say, okay, guys, this is it. We're all in, let's go. And in my mind, I've thought about two different words that apply here. Protect is one. And I think there's a time and place that principals need to protect their staff from a new thing that's not going to last very long, a new thing that doesn't actually affect them, but will just upset them or create tension or stress. And then there's times, though, where we need to say, okay, listen, this is a new mandate. It's a new initiative. I'm trying to understand it. We're going to work together to try and get this put into place. We're gonna do a slow roll as much as we are able to with the initiative's timeline, et cetera. What I think about, Will, is my state, there's been a flurry of action in our state house. And one particular bill has gone back and forth and back and forth. And then there are lawsuits, and the lawsuits are argued locally, and then they're argued in district court, and some of them may end up in the Supreme Court. And as it works its way through the courts, there are constant changes. Here's a situation where, as a principal and as a leader, I have said, let's pause. Let's wait, because if I train you every 4, 5, 6 months on a whole different direction, you're not only going to lose faith in me, but the importance of this bill or this law is going to be diminished. So I'm going to keep you updated with 3 or 4 sentences on what's happening in the courts, but we're not going to lose our minds over this until we are certain that this is the path forward. So I think you have to use your cognitive leadership abilities to say, is this a protect or is this a connect?
I'm so glad you said that. And this may not be the same application, but I'm going to just talk about, even in my state, I've had conversations with leaders recently about, when do I speak up, or, or when do I push back when things are coming from, like, our state department, for instance, that we don't agree with or that we think are not good for students. And my response to that is exactly that. Sometimes there's going to be initiatives that are coming across that really, if you think about it, aren't going to change the way you practice at all. Maybe they're just some weird initiative that's somebody's political culture war or whatever, and they just want to get something out there and make schools publish it or post it or whatever. But then maybe there's something that's actually going to hurt kids, like the loss of Title I funding, or something that's really going to threaten the viability of our schools. You need to speak up. And so sometimes you need to be able to take a step back from something and go, I'm not waging into this war, this one over here, because it's not really going to change the way we do school. Or I can respond to that request and give the data or whatever, and try not to waste the time of my people in the process. But this is an area where I may need to rally some support, or I may need to go to a state house, or I may need to make a phone call, because this is going to be something that could really hurt us. And so I know we're kind of being really broad with this too, Jen, because but that word wisdom just keeps coming back in, which is knowing when to apply the right amount of pressure to a situation to protect people, but also sometimes you need to lean into situations that are going to actually be helpful to your community, or that there's going to be a high stakes accountability connected to it if you don't. So I'm glad we stayed on that question, because I do think that fleshing that out looks different from place to place. But I do think that leaders have, and I love the words that you used, when do you know when to buffer or protect? And then when do you want to connect, or I would say leverage, that the initiative that's coming through.
Yeah, and protect from or connect to. That's really
Mhm.
the difference, to buffer or to leverage.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, as we wrap up our Q&A, if you've got questions that you want to send to Jen or me, send us an email at will@williamdparker.com, and we can always include your Q&As in the show. Jen, a lot of these questions that I'm bringing are from ones that I send out in surveys to people that are participating in training that I'm doing. So we'd love to hear yours. But as we step into today's conversation with Olina Banerji, I'm so excited for listeners to hear that. But Jen, how can people stay connected with you and your resources?
Yep, they can find me at jenschwanke.com or shoot me an email at jen@jenschwanke.com.
And listeners, you can always find our information and resources and today's post at our website at williamdparker.com. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters, and we hope you enjoyed today's show. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 427.
Hello, Principal Matters podcast listeners. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke here talking with you again today, and I have a different type of guest today. Not that she is different, but that her role itself is different. So, my friend Olina, who I met at an ASCD conference not long ago, is here. She is a reporter for Education Week, and I know many of our listeners are subscribers and really keep close ties to Education Week when they, as a way to keep up with what's going on in education. So, Olina, hi.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited, and principals are my beat and my bread and butter. So great to be speaking with them via your podcast.
I love it. Principal Matters podcast listeners, have you ever heard someone say principals are my beat and my bread and butter? So there you go. This is your person. And she brings such good insight too. So I'm really looking forward to this unique conversation. And Olina, we met because last spring, I believe it was in Nashville, we were at an NASSP conference actually. I think earlier I said ASCD, but
Yes, you're right. It was an SSP conference. Yeah.
okay, so we were there and I was presenting, and you and I kind of had a little impromptu meeting outside of the room where I was presenting, and we ended up talking quite in depth about conflict in about the topic of conflict management. We had about 12 minutes, I think, and we got intense very quickly, remember?
Yes. Yes.
And so I said, you know, we have to continue this conversation, and why not record it for a ton of people to listen. So let's talk about you. Let's tell our listeners who you are. Talk about your journey as a reporter. And my goodness, what led you to being a reporter for Education Week in the US? Start at the beginning.
All right. Well, I mean, before I start, I just wanted to say, Jen, your insights from even that sort of 12-minute chat we had was sort of great in informing my understanding of what the principal's role is. So yeah, I'm just going to put that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. About me, reporters don't usually get a chance to sort of reflect on their journey all that much. And when you sent me the questions, I did go back and started thinking about my career. So I started off in India about 12 years ago. I started as a reporter for a women's magazine in a national, as part of a national newsroom called India Today. And I worked with these 5 really dynamic young women to put together this monthly magazine. And we used to write about workplace issues, women's health, just everything that would concern a working professional. And I learned a lot through that process because it was the first time I was handling a product. It was the first time I knew how to think about an audience and write for them. So it was a really great kind of grounding to journalism. And of course, things have changed a lot. We used to write in print. So things have changed a lot once things moved to a digital medium. But I took a little bit of a detour after that. I worked in the nonprofit space for the next 6 years, where I helped social entrepreneurs develop their ideas. And through that, I think I came in touch with a lot of people who are working for the youth in our country. So India is a very young country, and there's a lot of passion and a lot of innovation amongst young people, but they always don't have the opportunity to explore it. So education, of course, plays a huge role in that. Not just education, but also ways that you can put your ideas onto a big scale. And a lot of young people have ideas, but they often don't have the training to do that. So that's what got me interested in trying to tap the potential of young people. And in my next job, when I got an opportunity to write again, I focused on sort of how young people could be helped at the intersection of education and technology. So my journey kind of changed again about 6 years ago when I started writing for a digital newsroom called the Ken, and I wrote a lot about edtech and how that was influencing the way classrooms were being developed, influencing the way education, the business of education was changing. And that really kind of gave me a grounding on what sort of are the critical issues in educating our young people. And those don't really change. I think that the context change when you move countries, but the fundamental issues of learning loss, the fundamental issues um, of safety and security while you learn, or the issues of really opportunities in this digital age, they don't change. So when I moved to the US about 3 years ago, I wanted to write for a newsroom where all of these different interests would kind of intersect and give me an opportunity to explore the US through sort of a journalistic lens, which I got with Education Week. So I've been here about a year now. It'll be a year in October, in November. And I have been focused on a really interesting part, I think, of education, which is principals, because they are in this interesting kind of fulcrum position in the whole system of education, and so much flows through them. Yet, unfortunately, in many circumstances, they don't have control over a lot of things. So it's been an interesting, conflicting, but exciting position to cover. And of course, through that, the various kind of issues around cell phone, school safety, the digital age, sort of everything. So my journey has been all over the place, but I'm really excited to land where I did.
Wow, that's so. I wish our listeners could see me right now on Zoom because I usually kind of sit and absorb and listen. But as you were talking, I was writing so many things down on my little notepad here. I think that's really profound what you said about principals being in that fulcrum position where so much flows through them,
Mhm,
yet so much is out of their control. I think,
mhm.
I'd like to sit in that for a minute because I think at that intersection is where all the frustration
Right.
lies right there because I'm responsible for so much and no matter what happens everybody kind of their neck kind of swivels and they look at the principal. What are we going to do? What are you going to do?
Mhm.
And they want that responsibility to be on the principal. And then the principal, I'm imagining a cartoon character with their hands up, like, well, what am I supposed to? I didn't do this. Why are you looking at me? So I feel like that will be both reassuring and validating for our
Mhm,
listeners.
mhm. Yeah, it's what I've learned through my reporting. And I think principals are just some of the strongest people in the system. I have this image of them sort of physically and mentally kind of bracing for impact, standing in front of the school, and everything, like we said, everything kind of goes through them. And if you look at the frame of conflict, right, a conflict erupting between an educator or a parent or even a superintendent and an educator, or school board, and what parents want, you can see how stressful it is to be a principal amidst all of that, because you have to implement policies that you may not agree with, or you haven't been consulted on. So there's so many principals that I talked to who said, well, we had to come into work during COVID when our colleagues didn't, and what did that mean for us and our families and our health? But you just have to do it because it's your job. And this isn't to minimize sort of any other critical role in the education system, but I just think principals are kind of uniquely positioned because yeah, because they are the leader within that sort of school as a city complex.
Right. Well, and I think about we're already off track on our questions, by the way. We'll get back. We'll get back. I'm thinking about the emotional and mental load of that work, which
Mhm.
is to be, I always say to principals this phrase, when the principal has a cold, the whole school has a cold. Everybody kind of looks to the principal. How are we feeling? How are we going to proceed? What's going on here? And so the principal has that mental load as well
Right.
as the professional load, so to speak.
Mhm.
And many principals I present all over the place, and principals, always joke that when they go home at night, the last thing they want to do is make a decision like that. It doesn't even like, where are we getting pizza? I don't care. I don't care. Just get the pizza, right? Because of that decision fatigue, compassion fatigue, empathy fatigue, all of those things that really point to that fulcrum that you discussed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I don't want to bounce all over the place, so I'm going to kind of continue with this thread. What are some of the topics that seem to resonate most with your readers?
So I mean, for the listeners of your podcast too, I think it's important to make a distinction between sort of the majority of our readers and then what the different audiences are, right? So a majority of our readers are teachers, are classroom teachers. So a lot of our content is focused on what would be top of mind for them. But of course, issues in education aren't siloed, right? What impacts the teacher also impacts the principal, also impacts the superintendent. So our next biggest readership is our school leaders, both at the school and the district level. So some of the things that have cropped up in our reporting, at least over the last year, are people just can't get enough of stories on curriculum, right? So reading science, what to do with math, curriculum around social studies. We're in an election year, so a lot of principals and teachers are now looking for advice on how do we handle tricky political conversations. What are you allowed to say in a classroom? What are your freedoms vis-a-vis speech versus what state laws dictate? So it's I think when we look at curriculum, often people think of it from a narrow lens of, hey, what goes on in our books, but I think it impacts sort of a larger conversation on how our classrooms conducted, how do teachers conduct themselves, what should principals watch out for. So this year we're going to be focused on advice for school leaders on how to navigate this tricky kind of political moment that we're in. And of course, there are perennial questions about, should we follow the science of reading or should we follow another method? And those questions kind of keep circling back. So
Right.
I would say curriculum is definitely something that's top of mind.
And I think this is fascinating because, again, the principals at that intersection of everything flows through them, they're responsible for it, yet a lot of it's out of their control. I have seen a fundamental shift in how we talk about curriculum in the past, even 5 years.
Mhm.
And it concerns me because so much of the ambiguity about curriculum has been, air quote, I'm doing my little finger air quote, has been solved by for-profit vendors who
Mhm.
say to principals and leaders, I got you. Just follow what is here. I'm going to send you the digital stuff. Don't worry. And then school leaders breathe a sigh of relief because everything's covered and safe. But then teachers have lost some autonomy there
Yeah.
and the ability to look at their class, look at their community, and see what's needed. And so I'm concerned about that, but I also understand the feeling of safety that comes with a for-profit curriculum vendor.
Absolutely. We did this story, a series of stories a couple of months ago about leadership in the science of reading. And I think, that was a lens that we hadn't really explored before. And it was really about it really, what you're saying resonates with me because I reported on those bunch of stories. There are these external third party providers that bring in sometimes very quality material, right? Sometimes it's been vetted by researchers
Right.
and has a
Yes.
standard. But then you have to also think about how this plays out in a school, right? Who is the instructional leader that takes control of this curriculum and then really sort of rolls it out within a school, gets teachers on board, provides the right PD. And again, I mean, with the principal podcast, I'm going to bring it back to principal. So we really have to also think about the role of principals as an instructional leader when we're talking about coverage on curriculum, because it's a role I think that not everyone is prepped for often. It's you are expected to do it. You don't get specific PD for principals on how to roll out a science of reading curriculum. So we also have to think about who are the different levers in the system that are going to help us with curriculum. And I think principals play a big role there.
Oh, exactly. And I was working with a group of students, graduate students who want to be principals, and it took about 3 weeks. This was a class, about a 15-week class. It took about 3 weeks for them to admit how scared they were to be
Mm,
instructional leaders
mhm.
because they hear that all the time, right? You have to be an instructional leader. They hear that over and over. But they also know about the management tasks.
Yeah.
I got to take care of the building. I have to make sure people show up. I have to complete these evaluations. I have to work with students with discipline. And those management tasks tend to be embedded deeply in a school district division's policies. So they feel safe, right? But
Mhm.
instructional leadership, I hear this all the time. People say, well, I'll say it. I'll use just me as the pronoun. I was an English teacher. I would go into a math class and be like, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. So it takes years, I think, to build that confidence. And I think there's a truth there about instructional leadership for principals that really does point to additional weight on their shoulders where they have to learn that too. And sometimes people dismiss a principal who will express that concern with this line. Well, don't worry, good teaching is good teaching. You know it when you see it. Well, that's true, but what if the content isn't there? The teacher's engaging, the students are connected. But what if they're not learning what they're supposed to be learning?
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
there's a little bit of a push-pull there as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think principals are told, oh, just be good instructional leaders, but then no one tells them how to do it sometimes.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Over 1 million teachers use IXL in their classrooms every day for one reason. They love it. Why? IXL is where the magic happens. With just one platform, teachers can personalize learning for every student. IXL gives teachers all the tools they need to enhance and differentiate instruction without adding work to their plates. Plus, IXL has decades of expertise and is proven to be effective. Studies on more than 70,000 schools across 45 states show that those who use IXL outperform others on state tests. Ready to bring the magic to your school? Visit ixl.com/PM to learn more.
Hello, listeners of Principal Matters. Are you a school leader feeling stretched too thin, frustrated with the same old systems? Well, let's shake things up. Join the School X book study with me, Jethro Jones, host of Transformative Principal. This isn't just any old book study. I do things differently. We're going to use game-changing strategies to build a school environment where students and teachers thrive, and so do you. We're talking about designing your school with purpose, reducing stress, and actually leaving work at work. You'll be able to partner with parents, boost school engagement, and use AI as a tool that works for you. Are you ready to lead with intention? Then head on over to jethro.site/will and secure your spot today. That's jethro.site/will.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you just recently did a series for Education Week. I am just so curious. How are ideas generated in your newsroom? How are they developed? Walk us through that just for a little bit of fun to teach us how that happens.
That's a great question. And I think I've been in a couple of newsrooms now, so I think most newsrooms kind of follow a similar pattern. You have a brainstorming stage. So a group of reporters will bring ideas from their beat. So each reporter, like myself, is assigned a beat. Now you don't strictly have to stick to that beat. I've reported on cell phones and school safety and social media usage. So it's not that I only cultivate ideas around school leadership, but typically I think each reporter is sort of responsible for their area of coverage. And so if there's something important happening there, if there's a piece of research that's come out, if there's something in the news cycle that needs to be looked at, reporters will generate new ideas, bring it up to their editors, and then editors brainstorm on which are the most sort of pertinent ideas to work on. So really, when you look at an individual reporter's life, that stage of life is kind of isolating because you're in your research, you're online, you're talking to people, and you're really trying to find out, hey, what's concerning people, right? What are the issues that we should know about, right? So for principals, for example, cell phones is a big, I'm sure for your audience,
Right.
it's a big sticking point. But even within cell phones, right? Have policies helped schools in restricting usage? Have they helped, then classroom maintenance? So these issues constantly keep moving and evolving. So for a reporter, I think the idea is to just get yourself stuck in and make sure that you're riding the wave of, the opinion changing or policies changing, and you have your ear to the ground, and you have your heart in the right place, and you're trying to bring a few voices, and you're trying to amplify them to like the whole community. So I think that's very much sort of what a reporter does. And how ideas generated, I think you just after so many years, I think I know who to go to for new ideas, how to look for them, how to parse out, what's going to be interesting for our audience. So I hope that answers the question. It's kind of an amorphous process, to be honest.
Right. I imagine many principals have a picture of a newsroom in their head. I think of the movie All the President's Men,
yeah.
and like you're all sitting around in some dark black and white room smoking and madly typing away on some old typewriter. And that is not, I assume, what it is now.
No, it's and I mean, for one thing, I think newsrooms have become more diverse. I mean, there's more obviously work to be done there, but in that old picture of All the President's Men, it's all men smoking away. But
Right.
it's great that newsrooms look different now, and especially I think with remote work, especially during COVID, or with the digital medium, I think has given even reporters more flexibility to work from different places. So we do have a lot of our staff that works from, different states, and they call in with their ideas. So the typical picture of a newsroom, I would say, has changed. But interestingly, when there's a big story out and all of us need to work on it, you get that same mojo back where you're all in the room, you're all tense, you're thinking about, you're keeping track of the news, and you're thinking about your next steps, and you're calling people. So that energy does come back when everyone's working on a big project together, and that's really fun. But I think the typical idea of the newsroom has kind of shifted a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that it's more diverse and that more voices can be heard across the country and really around the world because of
Mhm.
advances in technology. Because I think too, the speed though must have changed because, I'm sure it used to be that if a reporter needed some information, they could make a phone call, they could send a telegram, they had to, put something with a stamp on it and put it in the mail. You can instantly be Zooming with someone and having an interview. So that to me is probably really good. But I also know principals are we all are, right? About the
Mm.
speed, exhausted by the speed of the way information proliferates, if you
Mhm.
will. And I know many principals live in fear. I'm getting to a question here. Live in
Mhm.
fear of a parent kind of going rogue on Facebook or going rogue on Instagram or whatever about them or their school, and they can't pull the story back into truth. And so my question to you about that is, when you post a story,
Mhm.
it's a good story. You've studied it, you've read it, you've researched it, you've interviewed, and you get beat up online, say through comments or whatever.
Yeah.
What's your process for managing that? Because I think it probably very closely aligns with the principles scrolling through a Facebook tirade based in untruth. So tell me a little about that.
I mean, I have a lot of empathy for principals, and it's funny you should say that. We were just discussing how, with these digital tools in schools that help you keep track of, student assignments, etc. It's also a way for parents to constantly be in touch with educators and principals, and they often escalate it very quickly to the principal. So principals go home with like thousands of emails from like irate parents. And yes, I mean, I have empathy for like how the digital medium has also complicated things. I think my personal, but I have to say, I think everyone deals with that social media barrage differently. I think for me, it starts with a bit of surprise, because when you put out something, you really put your heart and soul into the story, you really worked hard and research stuff, and so it's a bit of a surprise initially. But then I think I've learned to parse out real criticism from just noise online. There are a lot of people who are just online who may not even be educators or parents or concerned parties who just want to put their opinion out there, right? So initially, it might seem like a block of negative criticism, but then you can start to sort of parse out has someone really engaged with your story, and are they asking and critiquing you on intelligent things? Like, are they asking intelligent questions and things that you can follow up on? Or are they just criticizing you for the sake of it? And I can illustrate this with an example, right? We put out the story on science of reading, and the focus very much was on what should leadership do. And one of the things that came out as a big strategy was, oh, leaders should do these walkthroughs, right? And we did a lot of research on what good walkthroughs are, and what do leaders like doing, and what do they like seeing on these walkthroughs, or what's the experience of them. And we put out a story around that, and I got a ton of comments on that story, not from principals but from teachers, saying, hey, but you didn't ask us whether we like the walkthroughs, right? And it was an obvious miss for me, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk about, hopefully do a story from the teacher's perspective. So I think criticism like that really helps you kind of expand your horizon. It makes you a better reporter.
Well, okay, so now I'm going off track again. I also think this is just my personal opinion, so please, listeners, understand that. I think there's so many trends in education that are a bad idea, but they get such traction that principals think, well, I better be doing that, So I think principals make that exact same mistake. They say, okay, walkthroughs, that's what everybody's doing. I'm going to start doing walkthroughs.
Yeah.
And they too don't say to the teachers in their building, is this going to work for us? Is this what our culture needs? And I
Yeah.
say, I'm probably about to really offend some principals, but there was this big trend with mobile desks.
Mhm.
And principals, converting overhead projector carts and making mobile desks. And I want to be very clear. I think that works for some principals. That would never work for me. It would drain me. It would drain me emotionally. I needed to be able to go to my office, close the door for 30 minutes,
Mhm.
catch up on things, and then go back out. So
Mhm.
part of it is we have to have the perspective of others. Like you said, dang, I should have asked the teachers. And principals, I think, sometimes should say, oh, I should ask the teachers. They also should say, I should ask myself, is this
Absolutely.
right? Or is this just a trend? Or did I just read a book that made something sound really, really, compelling, but it will not work here? And have the internal strength to say, I'm not going to follow that trend.
Absolutely. And I think there's something connected to this, right? I do think principals and I've spoken to like hundreds over the last year. I think there are some principals, like you said, who want to engage with people throughout the day, and it energizes them, it doesn't drain them. Whereas, there are other principals who may want that 30 minutes or 15 minutes to, scarf down your lunch. So,
Right.
and that's totally fine. I think principals who have a modicum of success with certain policies know what their non-negotiables are with that policy, right? They decide that this is going to be the parameter of things. I'm making like a box with my hands,
Right.
but what do I put into the box, and what do I keep strictly out of the box? And if you can negotiate, if you can set those boundaries with a little room for negotiation later on, I think principals kind of do better. But I think what's also connected to this very quickly is it matters how much experience you have, I think, right? It matters how new you are. So we know that the principal turnover rate has decreased massively from like over 10 years to about 3 or 4 years, and we have a quicker rotation of people becoming principals, and I think that's a great thing for teachers to move up. But we also have to think about then what is the kind of training and support we're giving to new principals, because it's not easy for newer principals to say no to everything. You're more likely to be pliable, you're more likely to be, like you said, a little bit nervous or scared about saying no to things, or you might think, oh, the district wants me to do this exactly this way and I must. So in the walkthrough example, it was mandated in the curriculum that they had adopted, so there wasn't a lot of room for them. So I think that's another thing, that the demographics of how quickly principal turnover is happening right now. I think that also is a critical factor here.
Well, that's a whole other
Yeah.
podcast. That's true. Like, because my question is, where are they going? And I think I know where they're going, which is, higher among the in the leadership tiers of districts, because there's a lot of turnover at those high levels, which creates openings.
Absolutely.
And that's a whole other topic we could dig into. And listeners, I think Olina answered the question I was going to ask her next, which is, what are some of the things you've had to learn and develop in yourself? I heard you say you've talked to hundreds and hundreds of principals. I bet you've had the best principal preparation education out there just from hearing from so many principals. And I bet it's fascinating how different people's perspectives are, right? Depending on where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea. We should just create a book of like anecdotal evidence, because sometimes it's just so tiring to go through like mounds and mounds of data and research. And you're like, yeah, I know this, but let's just talk about practical examples.
Right.
But I'm making a plug for education.
Right. Well, I agree. When I got my doctorate, a lot of it was based in theory, and I spent about 70% of the time saying, yeah, this won't work. There's no way. So I hear you on that one.
When it comes to principal prep, I think, instructional leadership, I think, is one of the big ideas that I think most prep programs are working on. Also, this idea of supporting principals through sort of just-in-time training, right? So I think cell phones weren't a big problem maybe a decade ago, but now they are. They're very much a part of how you govern inside a school. So are principals getting specific help on digital policies, right? A lot of the times, even districts don't really know where to draw the line on usage, and principals are expected to implement this and pass down mandates. But do we really have supportive structures for principals there, right, to think about this? Or, for example, when we talk about culture wars within schools, and I think that's something that's been sort of very front and center over the last few years, things around bathroom usage or book bans. Again, these may not be persistent issues, but the fact that schools have become grounds for more political conflict, are we helping principals to navigate this part of leadership, right? So when we did the whole series on depolarizing schools and depolarizing conflict, I think one of the things that I heard constantly was principals were just like, I have to learn how to be more empathetic, or I've had to learn how to put myself in someone else's place. I've had to learn how to navigate difficult meetings. And that's not something, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, but that's not something that typically is part of like a principal prep packet, when you're studying to be a principal. So that's something I feel like a lot of principals right now are thinking about.
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's principals have to have that just in time training, but just in time is often a teeny tiny window. I think
Mm-hmm.
about COVID.
Mm-hmm.
No principal on March 1st
Absolutely.
had any idea what their life was going to look like on March 20th of 2020. And, one of my questions that I was going to ask you is, what are the biggest worries that you see about the future of education in the US? And that's a hard question to answer, isn't it? Because we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. And it's really, I'll give you a really small example, right? COVID was sort of a big meteor that hit education systems across the world. But even sort of the growth of AI, right? The rise of AI more recently, it's not something that schools could have predicted would impact them in such a huge way, right? And a lot of the rhetoric we hear around AI is that, oh, it's going to make education more personal. It's going to sort of, make it easy. We're going to have these futuristic bot tutors or whatever. And while some of that enthusiasm I share, I do think that it's complicated schools in a way that nobody could have predicted. So in Baltimore a couple of months ago, we saw sort of the misuse of AI against a principal, and that person unfortunately had to go through a whole review, etc. Of course, he was exonerated, but it when I spoke to the people around him, they just said, well, this principal's life is kind of altered forever, right? And so there are these things that they're so hard to predict. But there are some consistent problems, I guess, that we will keep coming up against. One is sort of the learning fallout from COVID. I do think states are still struggling to get up to a point where they were before the pandemic. And a lot of that critical work has to happen in schools. We did see some gains with tutoring, but I do think it has to somehow this extra help has to be, for the lack of a better word, fused into the fabric of a school, right? So to be able to kind of get up to speed with the learning loss levels. The other thing is, I just think technology is going to get more and more complicated, and we talked a whole bunch about it. But it's an unpredictable wave, and I don't think any of us are ready to deal with sort of the consequences of that. And of course, I think the third thing that I really hear, and this is completely sort of from my reporting, is principals and educators are worried about disciplinary issues, behavior challenges with kids, and they seem to be growing. So that's connected to the idea of kids not wanting to come to school, which is connected to the idea of chronic absenteeism, which is connected to the larger idea of what does school look like as we get further into the 21st century. And I think a lot of principals are also worried about losing kids to, the public school principals are worried about losing kids to either private schools or to voucher-driven schools. And in some cases, they're going to be able to retain them, but in some cases, we're going to see school closures, or we're going to see, mass movement of kids out of the public school system. And that's, again, something I feel is going to be a big turning point in American education.
It is. It really is. There's a lot of heavy stuff in there. And back to technology, I sat in a AI Gemini training, Google Gemini, yesterday, and I was blown away. I think I heard 10% of what she said, because I was so blown away at the capabilities of AI. And I kept thinking, this is unchecked. There's nobody monitoring the speed of this. Not that we could even slow down technology, but the profound impact on how we think and what we need to be able to do. I worry that our education system, and I don't just mean public education, I mean all of it, is not going to be able to keep up with kind of the wild, wild west of technology. And so let me narrow down all those fantastic things you just said
I'm
into
sorry
one
to have
question. No, this is so good. No, this is so good. And you're so stinking smart. It's awesome to talk to you. And it has my brain really worrying. And I'm imagining all these principals commuting in their cars on a highway somewhere saying, slow down, Olina, you're saying so many good things. So tell me what projects you're working on right now. Like, what's your thing right now?
My big thing is, and like I said, I think reporters are just always learners. And I think I'm back to sort of in a learning phase, because it's my first US election as a reporter, and I'm excited to see what goes down. But I'm also, I know schools and education is front and center here. And one of the projects I'm really kind of passionate about is trying to look at the role of leadership in basically parsing out what's good political conflict versus what's negative political conflict. And, we've made a start through our depolarization series, but I want to go deeper, and I want to understand how can principals start to think innovatively about using this kind of political moment, but also how can they kind of maybe protect themselves from any sort of upcoming conflicts they may be part of? How can they manage communities of parents and educators and school board and students, right? How can you engage everyone in a conversation which is productive and which actually is useful and educational for everyone? And I've been speaking to a lot of principals who are now part of trainings, where they actively go to conflict management trainings. They actively are trying to understand very kind of basic things around how to handle anger and emotion. And you wouldn't really think that principals are kind of spending so much time on this fundamental core stuff when they have like a million other things to do. But I think that's really interesting, because it goes back to something like very human in all of us. And the fact that principals are taking that extra step and putting themselves through this kind of training, I think is, I mean, hats off to them. I think it's a credit to them, because not a lot of professionals would do that, midway into their career. So I think that's something that I'm passionate to learn more about.
Right. And that's full circle. Thank you for serving that softball up to me there, Olina, because that's what we talked about in our 12-minute meeting outside of that room is conflict. And I think we discussed too, the very close tie between conflict and communication. I've been called to work with districts on conflict management. And then when we dig down, I dig down with the district leader, what they really need help with is communication, because we have to be strong, confident communicators, who listen before we can effectively mediate or manage or resolve or ignore or whatever a conflict that's come our way. So, okay, tell our listeners, if they want to reach out to you in any way, how can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I am not, I have to say, super active on it, but if you do message me, I will 100% get back to you. And Jen, I can send my Twitter handle to you to share in the show notes. My email, banerji@educationweek.org, is always open. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm of that old social media generation. So my LinkedIn is also open for suggestions and questions and things you want to talk about. And please do reach out. I think it's wonderful to have a community to speak with.
Excellent. Okay, I don't want to offend anyone, but you're one of my favorite interviews ever. This has been so amazing. I feel like I'm going to listen back to it and have to pull over and take notes, even though I have like 2.5 pages of notes here. This has been just fantastic. So thank you so much for your time. And listeners, check out the show notes. You will learn where to find our guest today and really be able to, I'm going to summarize all of this as best I can, but you might have to push replay and listen again. So thank you so much, Olina, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, this was a really fun conversation. Thank you.
Find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.